Welcome to Black Independence Day. I apologize for the start time, but technical difficulties, it happened. It's a first launch event, so we are respecting the universe and accepting what happens. They wanted us to start at 2:39, so here we are. This is an exciting day. This is our last panel of the day, so I'm super excited to be hosting this panel. My name is Ann Stacy. I am an educator, a traveler, facilitator. I currently work in New York City as a community school director. I manage culture strategy in collaboration with school leadership and community partners. And I'm a huge believer in crafting spaces for self-reflection and community building, which is why I'm very excited to be involved in Black Independence Project. And I believe that that's also apparent in my work as a creative writer, as well as a host of a monthly community circle series. And so for today's panel, Staging Our Stories, we're really going to be keying in on the importance of storytelling as an art form, right? It's been used both as social and cultural opportunities to share stories, lessons, wealth, knowledge. And the power of storytelling has been used to create, to challenge thinking, change, and impact generations. So for our panel today, we're really focusing on how storytelling in all its forms, whether that be writing, art, creativity, music, social media, is necessary to achieve the political change that we want, and also to continue to shift and impact our understanding of what it means to be Black today. So I'm excited that you guys are here joining us. We have an amazing lineup of panelists. I'm super, super excited to introduce them to you. First up, we have Maria Fernanda. Maria Fernanda is an early career poet. Her work, her poems have appeared in The Wide Shore, The Breakbeat Poets Volume 4, Latinx, Soul Sister Review, and elsewhere. She's a founder of Candela Writers Workshop, designed to support Black Latinx poets through the preservation and advancement of Black Latinx literary work. She's a Black Ecuadorian American and an adoptee with a cultural background branching to Louisiana, Texas, and she's a native of Washington, D.C. So go ahead and show Maria Fernanda some love in the chat. Next up, we have Chloé Adams. She is the co-founder and chief marketing officer of PYNK Lemonade. Chloé is a media specialist. She's responsible for amplifying brand messaging through avenues like digital and social media, experiential marketing, public relations, influencer engagement, and partnerships. Chloé really hopes that her work will serve as a beacon for young girls interested in pursuing careers in media. So give it up for Chloé. And finally, we have Brianna Jefferson, #Jumbos. We went to undergrad together, but Brianna has over 7 years experience at the crux of technology and social media, executing social strategy for global media organizations and publishers, including Disney, ABC, NBC, NBC News, and NPR Radio. She was also the first Black woman to be the managing editor at the Tufts Daily, which is the university's 40-year-old student newspaper. So go ahead and show Brianna some love as well. So we're gonna get straight into it. Those are our panelists, a little bit about them, but they'll have a chance to tell you more about their work. Our first question really focuses on, what do you do now? How does your work intersect with storytelling? And why do you think that's important? And so I'll have Maria Fernanda kick us off, if that's all right.
Thank you, LA. Thank you, Markeisha, Lawrence. I'm so glad that we're all here. This is super exciting. And I just think it's fantastic. Having been to a couple of panels earlier today, just like the national engagement is just really fulfilling. So thank you so much. I'm a poet, as Lorianne said. I guess, in addition to that, I'm actually a program manager too. So a lot of my work has been creating programs in local environments, depending on where I'm living, as well as actually working in the music industry as a manager and contract manager. And just really thinking about arts advocacy. Storytelling is something that happens not only in my poetry, but also actually in my professional work. So a lot of my work is always surrounded in how do we support other people telling their story? How do we like offer, different avenues in which people can tell stories besides the ways that we've been taught or told in restricting places like the public school system, or other, places that are that we quote unquote have to go to. So that's just a little bit about me, and yeah, just really passionate about it. So I'm gonna pass it to Chloé.
Hi, everybody. That was a beautiful introduction. Thank you, Lori, for that. I am also very happy to be here and thankful for the opportunity. I actually consider myself a storyteller through my work as a brand specialist, a marketing specialist. I think a big misconception with marketing is that it's just you place stuff on billboards and you have graphics and then that's pretty much it. What I realized where marketing and then our culture kind of intersect is that we have so many skilled and talented individuals around us within our culture that don't necessarily have the resources or don't necessarily have the opportunities, same as some of our counterparts may have. And so I like to take what my skill is and use that to tell those stories of those people who have done something that have quote unquote shifted the culture, or done something that has impacted someone else in the world, or just plain talented. And so that's what I kind of like to do, that I like to do with my business and my business partner and our team. We take those stories and we use our creative abilities to spread the stories of others. And so that's our version of active storytelling, if you will.
I love this. This makes me so happy. Thank you. I'm so happy to be on this call with everyone, Maria and Chloé, and thank you again, Lorianne. My name is Brianna Jefferson. I am the Associate Manager of Social Media for Glamour Magazine, which is a global magazine. There are issues across the world in different countries. It's part of Condé Nast, which is kind of the main magazine publisher in the US. What I really want to share with everyone today is just empowerment, knowing that there is career opportunity, there is growth opportunity within social media, and becoming a skilled storyteller, someone who's able to ask questions and learning how to dig deeper and help people connect with one another. That is, I think, inherent in our culture. That is, I think part of Blackness around the world. That's what makes it so beautiful, when you can be in any city, anywhere in the world, and someone has a tub of hair grease and a comb. You can probably feel that same feeling. So I definitely want to let everyone know that you can have social media and storytelling and culture live in the same space and make a living from it. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. I think it's so important what you guys have already spoke to, right? This idea of empowering ourselves and our communities, and then also being able to find a way into it, right? Because I think oftentimes, especially in the Black community, our stories get told for us. So what does it mean to be able to tell our own stories? What does it mean to see ourselves in social media and growing with this industry that does rely on us to be able to not only tell our stories as individuals, but tell our stories as community and broadcast that out. And I think that's so important. And I think it segues perfectly into our first question, which is, in what ways can we as individuals craft and hone our stories? And really, I want us to put this into the context of the current pandemic, the resurgence of the civil rights movement with Black Lives Matter, and how important is it that we do so? So not only how can we craft our stories, but how important is it that we do that as individuals?
I know there's a little bit of an order, but I actually want to throw it over to Chloé and come back around.
So that's a good question. It's a very good question, especially through the eyes of branding. You're always talking about crafting your story. What does your story look like, right? I always, when I'm speaking to my clients, I'm always saying that your story is yours. It's uniquely yours. And that's the best story that's actually out there. And especially during this time, especially during the pandemic, during protests, and during this time when we're kind of like in civil unrest almost, it's really important that you understand what your story is and then use that to kind of empower what you're trying to do. And so in terms of crafting our stories and understanding how to go about it, my easiest advice to anybody would be to be yourself. Everybody needs somebody else, or needs to hear somebody else's story. Somebody else's story can bless the next person and you wouldn't even know it. And so while trying to figure out how to craft or how to move around or how to figure out what you want to talk about, it probably wouldn't be genuine if you're trying to work, if you're trying to, work through somebody else's type of storyline, or trying to figure out how to go about, a certain way or a certain method of expressing yourself or providing resources. The only way that you can be 100% genuine is if you're yourself. And 9 times out of 10, the person that you are going to speak to, the person that you're going to see, the next person down the street is going to be amazingly impacted positively by what you're doing. And so that would be my advice to anybody who's looking to craft their story, is to use what you have already to impact the person right next to you. It's fairly simple.
I can go next if that sounds good. I think a couple of things that came to mind as we were talking are stories have beginning, middle, and end, right? Like you can't end a story unless you started somewhere. And that's, I think, one thing that's important for me to remember. I think it's important for a lot of people to remember that where you start is never the same as where you end up. For example, I love farmers markets. I love gardening. And back in 2013, I started Snapchatting every week that I went to the farmers market in my neighborhood. My Snapchat maybe had 20 people, all of my college friends. I think Lorianne was one of them, rooting me on week after week. But from that experience, I became curious about food. I became curious about what vegetables are grown in different seasons. And I would learn, share that information on my social media accounts, and kind of continue to build that curiosity. Fast forward now, at my role at Glamour and within Condé Nast, I'm able to write articles about how to help people begin gardening, how to help people begin to grow their own food. And all of that comes from having a curiosity and from beginning your story wherever you are. I'm positive that if I had not started just Snapchatting my little grocery store hauls and my little farmers market trips, I wouldn't have thought deeper. I wouldn't have been able to ask questions and form a true story, and one that's able to live on and impact people now on a global level. It will be in magazines, and kind of having that impact and understanding that curiosity is the root of storytelling. So find a question that you want to answer and just chase that all the way through. That's how I feel.
I love that, like, especially the idea of just thinking about what's the shape of a story. Something I'm really inspired by is Robin Cox Lewis's words about fragmentation, and the idea that even that a whole story is the only way to tell a story, and that actually fragments is one of the blackest things that could ever exist. Like, we're always told, oh, this is the story of our history, this is the story of our future, and so on, and there's so many parts missing. So with us even being here speaking, we're all sharing different pieces of our stories and then coming together collectively, of course. And so I think what makes storytelling so powerful is the fact that when we do it together, and of course orally, I think that's also where it can start. I just think the idea of wholeness and completion are myths. And I think once we let that go, it actually frees us up to like just have a story, even, not necessarily have an ending, right? Or maybe we didn't even have a beginning. So I really love what you said too, Brianna.
Thank you guys for that. So I'm going to shift gears again slightly, but something that you made me think of, Brianna, this idea that questions start these stories a lot of the times, right? A quest for ourselves, a quest for that connection, a quest for understanding. And so to our panelists, I'm just want to offer this question about, well, what question sparked it for you, right? What question were you at the root of as you began your journeys and you began your careers in storytelling? What did you want to find the answer to? If you guys could answer that. And again, we don't have to stick to any order. It's only like 3 of you, but I want to offer that out if it moves you.
Well, it's interesting that you asked that. That's an interesting question, just because I started with my business partner. We started our company, our agency, as a reaction to some of the people that didn't take us seriously in our work. We felt like we were stuck. We felt like we didn't have anywhere to go. We felt like people weren't taking us seriously, and we had all the skills and we were doing meaningful work, but we just did not feel fulfilled. And so I think the question that sat with me when we decided to take that risk was, who are we going to impact? And that was the biggest thing. I cannot even stress it enough. I always knew that the work that I had to do was greater than what I thought, essentially. I always knew that I was put on this earth to do something so grand that would actually help someone else more than it probably would help me. And so my question in terms of these stories was, how can this impact the next person? How can this save someone else's life? How can this open another opportunity for a girlfriend, a guy, a young Black girl who really just wants to get into these spaces? You know, somebody told me yesterday, 2 days ago, and I shared this with some of my people on Instagram. A woman, a counterpart, told me that my title for my company, Chief Marketing Officer, was too bold. And I thought to myself, I was like, you know, if someone else had, you know, started their company, and you know, a white male had started his company and he was a CEO of a startup, he would be looked at as kind of like a trailblazer, almost like, wow, look at him, a leader. He decided to take it on. I decided to start my company. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer and I'm too bold. That doesn't sit right with me. And so I'm telling the stories for the little girls that are being called too bold. I'm telling the stories for my girlfriends who feel like they can't really enter into those spaces because they're not willing to take those risks because they're afraid. And so my question has always been, what can I do in my work that will impact or help the person next to me so that they can enter into those spaces and not have to listen to someone calling them too bold? And honey, I'll be as bold as I want to be.
Listen, I hear that, right? Like, who are you to tell me and to define me for myself when I've clearly told you who I am? I'm the Chief Marketing Officer. Like, that's it. I appreciate you, right? Like, be bold, stand in that power. Okay, so for Maria, Fernanda, or Brianna, what was your question?
For me, it actually started with a book of quotes. My mom brought home a book of quotes, and I found myself wanting to respond to them. And so a lot of times when I'm on different panels, we start talking about like our professional experience as to where we started. So I love that you are saying, what's the question? Because I think a lot of our professional experience actually started at home. And so like, that's a part of like, just our, what's the word? I don't know why I'm so nervous, guys. But in response to what Chloé was saying, I know LA, and like LA knows me. What I love about what is that it's funny because what Chloé said is also, it's actually the opposite in what I've experienced in the writing world. One of my favorite examples is Vivi Francis. She's from Texas, and she wrote poetry based on just her own experiences, starting wherever she needed to start. And when she started, you know, when her book was published, she would go to her readings, and everyone that was at her readings were like random, like, you know, actually like Mexican laborers, because people would come up and talk to her and say where they're from and how their story reminded them of home. And she was like, I had no idea that was my audience. So I think being aware of what our impact is, right? And then adding to that, realizing that our audience will find us, right? And so maybe not only is it the little girl, but maybe it's also the little trans boy that it's like, oh, wow, what Chloé just did, that just turned me up, right? And so I love that aspect of art.
This is awesome. Lori, LA, would you repeat the question for me, please?
Yes. So the question is just thinking about like your own journey into storytelling, that question that you want to find an answer for.
Oh, yes. Well, as everyone was speaking, it's so great when you have like memories to go back to, you can flash back. The memory that I flashed back to was growing up after the movie Toy Story 2 came out. I'm dating myself here, millennial life. I remember that movie inspired me to start a newspaper at my elementary school. And by newspaper, I mean I started scribbling on my desk like letters that I thought were going back and forth. And then we started playing the game Oregon Trail, which introduced me, to even more ideas of, okay, imagine if I were in this city, how would I tell someone across the country what to expect? And writing these things on the desk of my elementary school, not even on paper. But when I think about the question of finding what you're curious about, it's whatever pours out of you. They say write what you know for a reason. There's a reason for that. And I think it's as simple as looking around you, thinking about what are the topics you can go on about for hours for free. What is it that you mumble about in your sleep? What are the things that just electrify you? Maybe it's an interior design magazine. Maybe it can be anything on this planet. But when it comes to finding a question, it's just like, what is it that makes something light up inside of you that just like tingles and stimulates part of your brain that says, I need to know. And I think that's so much of my origin story, as it were, begins with having that like brain tingling sensation of there is something here that pleases me, that like just like is compelling me. And I feel like whatever's on the other side of that, I'm never sorry for the experience.
I think she froze. Are you guys?
Oh, sorry. I hope I didn't
I
freeze.
absolutely love that. And I love that you started with memory stories. And one of those early memories for me was our school just playing like dodgeball and everyone wanting to know who won. And I was just like, I'm just gonna report on this and like going to the computer lab and like creating all these competitive stories like, well, team A did this and team C did that and who's coming back. And those experiences of like, well, I was very curious, like, well, what if other people want to know? So I can just like be in on it. And it was one thing where it's just like, do I like gossip? And it was like, no, I just like sharing news. And so I love that. For our next question, though, I do want to circle back to something actually that Fernanda, you said earlier about this idea of wholeness as a myth. And it's really sparking this idea of what are some common misconceptions that people might have about storytelling or the narrative of like Black people that we really need to begin addressing, or if it's already being addressed, that we need to amplify more. And so I'm gonna open that question up to the group.
I think, again, I'm just speaking specifically about my experiences in the writing world. So many of the spaces in the writing world, even like the structure of a workshop, are very white and very, just these different ways that just offer constrictions. And so it's interesting that I think when you follow your natural intuition and what leads you to write, I think that's actually part of the writing process. If you like, dreaming is a part of the writing process, making bread and putting butter on it, that might be part of your writing process. I know it's part of mine. And so thinking about, like, you're making your own writing process. So I think that's a huge misconception in the writing world, is that you need to have poet voice. And it's like, and then the sea happened. And then like my dad never came home. And it's like, that's not, that's not the only stories that we're telling. And there's also different ways to actually tell that story, right? So thinking about like just the specificity of your life. And I think when we speak about our own specificity, it's way more universal than we think it is. We're just told often that Black stories aren't universal stories. And it's actually not true.
I think to also kind of touch on this idea of wholeness, kind of like what Fernanda was saying, is that a lot of people don't realize that the art is within the process. The art is within whatever you're doing to double back. And if you want to make the bread, if you want to, I think that's really cute, by the way. If you want to try something new, if you want to discover something, if it takes 1 year versus 10 years versus 1 month, I think that, what people think is that there has to be some structure, and there's never any structure to anything. None of this stuff would happen in the world if there was structure. Somebody had to have the idea and do something different. And so I think, again, from a marketing perspective, from a branding perspective, one of the things, if you go on our page, it says we do marketing our own way, because there is no way. There is no way. There's just doing what you love and getting the word out there. It's spreading the stories. It's making the bread. It's dancing, it's loving, it's experiencing time with your family. It's doing whatever you can to be inspired and allowing that path to take you to where you need to be. And I think that, again, I completely 100% agree with you, Maria Fernanda, because there is no way, no right way. I'll say that.
I love this. I mean, thank you all for the therapy for the week. I needed this. Truly, everything everyone has said is 100% spot on. And I feel like what's connecting your thoughts, Chloé and Maria, is the idea of doing something that you love and doing it again and again and again. I will tell you, I work in the world of social media. Last week, I made 2 TikToks for my job, literally on the clock, got paid to make TikToks. One of them went bonkers, did very, very well, over 2 million views. The other 70,000. Like the up, the down, the up, the down. But I'm not gonna stop posting. It's really understanding that regardless of what happens with one situation, it's the consistency, it's building a catalog. Storytelling is just kind of building a consistent catalog, saying that you're able to communicate. And that can have a lot of different platforms. It can be through social media, like your Instagram, your blog, platforms that you can own yourself. But at the same time, I think a lot of the storytelling we're able to do is sharing our skills. If you're really good at doodling, put your camera on a time lapse and take a video of you drawing. Share that. It's so much about whatever it is that you're gifted at that comes naturally. Just giving people a glimpse of that, because not everyone has the same skills as you do. People will gravitate towards you because you provide something that they lack. They will consume your stories. They will read your books, read your poetry, because you have a perspective they can't create on their own. So lean into being able to kind of create new perspectives. That is, as Chloé said, that's your superpower. Do it differently, not the same as anyone else, because it's the same with cooking, right? We all eat 4 or 5 meals a day. They might not all be beautiful, Instagrammable, but we all do it. We all need inspiration for food. If you're really great at telling stories through your culinary adventures, share that. Those small things that we all take part in, find a way to delight people with your way of presenting that. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. It can be an exciting space, but that's me. Thank you.
I love that, right? We don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? There's so many stories that already exist, but you can talk about yours in new ways. So we're not quite there to open up to question and answers. I'm actually going to ask one more question of the panel first. But if things are coming up for you, I really encourage you to use the Zoom feature and begin to ask those questions of the panelists, because we also want to make space for you guys here too, right? What are questions that you have about starting your journey, not just in writing or social media, but storytelling as a whole, and how do we continue to amplify our voices as individuals? So thinking again, to things that you guys have said earlier, Chloé about wanting to impact the next generation, Maria Fernanda about your audience finding you, and Brianna even just about sharing our gifts. What are some ways that we can better engage young people in amplifying their voices and their stories, and that of their communities. And I really think about now during this time of COVID, a lot of students and a lot of young people, their worlds have shifted drastically. And I think about that change and how will that impact a generation. And so thinking about all these things, what are ways that they can amplify their voices and make sure that it's meaningful for the students and the young people that's going to come after them?
Ask them and listen to them. And I know that sounds very simple, but I feel like, especially in this society, I mean, there's like a microscope on these kids. And if you're thinking about generations, right? Gen Z, for instance, school shootings, COVID, the age and day of social media and active bullying. They have access to a whole world, and they're forced to grow up faster than probably a lot of us have in certain ways. And I think, you know, I have some younger individuals on my team that we have working with us to kind of help develop their skills. And then I also have ones in high school that are that I consider mentees. And really, the simplest way that I get to them all the time is just asking and listening, because they are smart. And people don't take them seriously because they're younger. And I think my biggest thing is taking them seriously. When I ask them what's going on in the world, what they think about, you know, in terms of society and in this pandemic, they miss their proms and they miss their graduations and their friends. They've dealt with so much, but no one is listening or taking them seriously. And so I ask them these questions and they come full force with fire. And they just tell me everything that they can. And then I'll ask them, what can we do? And they have every single answer in the book. These young kids are leading these protests. These young kids, if you think about it, they're interning on Capitol Hill right now. These young kids are, and helping run the country. These young kids are activists. They're fighters. They're speaking. And we have to listen to them and take them seriously.
I think, oh, sorry. I was just saying yes to all of that, right? Like, I work in a high school with students, and I think oftentimes it's kind of like, well, you know, we're in a room and everyone's trying to make these decisions. I'm like, okay, but have we asked them, right? Like, they're 14, 15, 16 years old, they're 17, 18, like they can make decisions, like
right.
Ask them. Like, so I think it's so important what you're saying about just ask and listen. The answer's right there. So Maria, Fernanda, go ahead, you got this.
I mean, the things that come to my mind are, what does it look like when we, even before the questions that we ask young people, I think, what is it like, how do we greet young people? Just as basic as that. Like, I think, Chloé, there must be a way that you are, you know, setting an environment, right, in which young people can feel like they can tell you. And I think what I see often, and specifically my experiences working in like community centers in like the 5 boroughs of New York, as well as a detention center in DC, which is, like I said, my hometown. The biggest quote unquote mistake that adults would make is how they, you know, welcomed young people into a room. It was always very dismissive, or even, you know, adults that were super loving, they would try to like, you know, look at them and be like, oh, your shirt's untucked, you're doing this, you're doing that. And then after that, the adult's like, oh, well, how was your day? I don't want to talk to you after that. So like thinking about just what is the environment and the tone that we're setting before we even ask a question. Because young people, I think, we forget how extremely, extremely aware they are of they have a spatial awareness, right? And I think, I guess I just use education so much, but even the way that we have a teacher's desk and like a ton of quote unquote tiny desks in front of them assert a dynamic that's not welcoming, right? And I'm not saying necessarily we have to put the desks in a circle, but what does it mean when there's a clear, like just weighted difference, and just kind of consider all the different things that are influencing our young person, right? So just like yeah, that's what that made me think of.
And it's condescending almost as well. Why would I want to talk to you?
I'll add really quickly, as someone who perpetually looks like a 17-year-old and has been told on many a college campus that I was on tour with the local high school. Not bitter, it's just a reality. I think that empathy goes a very long way. It's like remembering what it feels like to not know, what happens a foot ahead of your face, like remembering that when you are young, for better or for worse, like legally you are your parents or you're alone on your own, but there aren't a lot of protections for you. And I think that approaching young people, understanding that there historically haven't been a lot of protections for them, and having that empathy can go a very long way, because so much, sorry, Brooklyn, apologies, love it, but because so much about the ability to remember what it feels like to be uncertain. I think that level of awareness can really help to bridge a divide that maybe 10 or 20 years has caused. Just because, again, younger people don't have the same access to capital that, someone in their late 20s does compared to your late teens. It's a very, very, very different ball game. So just really putting ourselves in the shoes of someone who historically hasn't been very supported outside of go to school, don't mess up in school, get out of school, don't have babies. I'm from Missouri. So like that was the message, right? It's like, go to school, don't have babies, get a job, mature, so that would be one of the ways I would say, and again, passing the mic, just saying, tell us what you think, tell us how you feel. Podcasts are a really great medium for that. If you're with an organization that does do storytelling, literally turning on a microphone and having people craft their own narratives can be very empowering and help us to let go of, the cycles and the thoughts that we repeat in our own heads, especially when we are younger.
Thank you guys for that. I feel like we talked about a lot as far as telling our own stories and then helping students to tell theirs. We have officially hit our Q&A portion, which means we have a little bit less than 10 minutes left in the session. So I do want to make sure that we get to some of your questions. So if you guys have them, please reach out. But we do have one from Nicolette asking the panelists, and she gives context. So social media can sometimes be discouraging due to the pressures of perfection. What are some ways of battling that pressure to post your story? And I would say like having the confidence, right, to post your story.
I even think, in addition to once you get to the point where you're ready to post that story, I think one thing we were bringing up here is like the importance of privacy, right? Like Brianna, you mentioned, sit down and try doodling or drawing and, maybe have the camera there, maybe not have the camera there, but either way, it's not recording publicly yet. So thinking about what can you learn about yourself, either as a young person or whatever age you are, when you're just not being seen, right? What kind of comes of that? When you're just being playful. I think that builds a lot of confidence because you kind of just letting yourself be yourself, right? And you're not trying to say, oh, this is gonna look like this, and then it's gonna have this, and then it's gonna be that. It's like, wait, you haven't even let yourselves like incubate, right? So kind of thinking about like how much privacy we may actually have now during this time of the pandemic.
You wanna go ahead, Brianna?
All you, Chloe, please.
Okay. I was gonna say, so I've had this issue. I feel like I have all these people looking at me all the time sometimes, and it's a lot of pressure. If you're sharing something personal versus you sharing something that's a little bit more professional, where the fine line is, what you need to do. I've always felt like, I think where I got comfortable with myself was, again, understanding that my social media page is my social media page, right? And what I'm putting out directly reflects me. And a lot of time it's been family, friends, happiness, all that great stuff, right? But then there are days when I'm not so happy, but I would like to share that story. And I think the pressure is not even just in terms of social media, but just in terms of what other people think, and social media has amplified that. And I think that there's such a thing as a balance, and there's such a thing as allowing yourself to understand what's real versus what's reality versus what is placed on social media. And if what you're putting out is what your reality is, then that's okay. Because 9 times out of 10, whatever you're looking at on somebody else's social media page is probably not their reality. And so understanding that and understanding where you are and how comfortable you are is probably where you probably be able to handle the pressures a little bit more. And then also, you know, people have Finstas and stuff, so you could do that too.
Not the thin stuff.
I love, I cannot understate the importance of Maria Fernanda's point about privacy. Like especially right now, it's nothing to do with right click, inspect, find a geotag on a website. So remember that it is your right to share as much or as little as you want. Your hands can just be like famous. Just make your hands famous. No one can identify you from those. A couple of points I would want to make about this. One is, think about when you're at a party and there's someone who's like dancing really weird, and it makes you feel comfortable, right? You're like, oh my gosh, that person's so, you know, kooky. I can be weird too. Try to be that person on social media. A friend of mine once told me, and it makes complete sense, you know, it's like when you are yourself, it gives others permission to be themselves. So be imperfect, you know, if you mess up your words, you don't always have to cut it out, you don't have to edit out, you know, bad angles, because that gives other people permission to be honest with themselves, and then ultimately maybe be honest online. So that's one thing I would say, you know, kind of like be that weird kooky person dancing, having a good time, because that makes other people feel safe. And again, that it fosters community, and people want to be around that. And the second point I wanted to make was developing a hobby. If you're in the social media rut, get a hobby, learn to knit. And, you know, once a week, there's your content calendar. Like once a week, you're like, here's what I knitted, or, you know, here's what I tried to cook, or, you know, just here's what I tried to build. It's a good way to get out of your own head, and also to master a technical skill and something you wouldn't do otherwise. One of my best friends picked up calligraphy recently. So she just like writes like letters. It looks like a Disney painting or something. But, you know, just building that confidence and being able to do something outside of your face or outside of how you turn on a camera. That's what I would recommend for storytelling.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. I want to fit in one more question before we wrap. I'm trying to be very ambitious here. But we have another one from our audience, from Lando. They said, when you share your story, we know it requires and takes a lot of vulnerability. So when you posted, published, produced, created your first story, what was your process to post and really to put yourself out there?
So I've just recently started like an IG live series, and it mostly is because and it's mostly because I wanted to showcase people who I know have an opinion, who are really dynamic thinkers. But I, you know, maybe in the earlier part of that process, I wasn't sure how I wanted to do that. And so I think if you are on social media enough, you end up finding people that inspire you, or you find pages that you find yourself going to make you feel better or inspire you or what have you. And so when I like launched the series, one of the things I was thinking about is like, why don't I just credit the people that inspired me? So I think when you are thinking about posting your first story or what have you, think about the people that were there before, that have been on social media. Maybe tag them and say, you inspired this that I started, right? So I think social media too easily can feel like a vacuum, and it's not, right? There are people that want to create alongside you, right? And that will be inspired by what you're doing. The only thing I worry about sometimes with social media is just the erasure that happens. For example, we saw the donations to Breonna Taylor's family campaign, and the person that created that campaign was erased at some point, right? And then it was a whole movement to bring her name back out. So just thinking about where the origins of these these stories are coming from, and just kind of thinking about that.
I would also say, if you're nervous, which is probably going to happen because I was nervous the first time I even did one thing. I knew it was right. I knew it was right because I was petrified. and that's okay because it means that I'm about to do something outside of my comfort zone, but it's usually outside of your comfort zone where you find the most opportunity. And so I think that considering how I felt, I knew that something big was going to happen, at least for me personally. So when you feel like you're nervous or whatever, that's where you are. And then, but also as a crutch, kind of like what Maria Fernanda said, the people who inspired you, the people who are around you, will root for you, remembering them, even in the midst of being nervous, kind of like that, will actually help to kind of bring you to where you need to be.
That part, that was it. Chloe and Maria Fernanda just nailed it. It's just so much of it is, if you're scared, that means that you care about it. You know, that means that it matters to you, and that's good. It would be worse, I think, if you produced something and then at the end you were like, meh. You know, like the fear means that there's an emotion behind it. So just like keep chasing that emotion. And not to bring Beyonce into this, but there is a Beyonce quote I love that says, and I will never forget, she's like, I never do anything without the taste of fear in my mouth. And I feel like that is so visceral. And it's like, yes, you tasted, but then you're not like, oh, can't finish this meal because there's like a flake of fear. It's like, no, like you just kind of, you adapt to it and you use it as an energy source. So just, as Chloe said, like if you do feel scared, that means you're probably on the right path.
I absolutely love that. And I think that was the most perfect words to end us with. If you are scared, it means you're on the right path. And we're all, I would say, pretty young. I don't know. And we're still on this journey, right? We're still starting out and we're still honing like what our story is going to be, what that impact is going to be. So I just want to say a huge, huge, huge thank you for our panelists for making time today, working with us to craft these questions and making sure that you guys are leaving today, I hope, richer than you came in. I'm very excited for our Black Independence Project, as I mentioned, and I hope that you'll follow them on social media, BLKIND Project. I'm gonna ask our panelists to please put your social medias in the chat as well. Please follow them, follow along with their stories. I'm sure they're also excited to learn more about your stories. And finally, we're gonna get into our wrap up of the day at 3:30. So I just wanna put a link in there so that you guys can quickly access that Zoom and join the co-founders, both Markeisha and Lawrence, and thank you in wrapping up the day because we did it, right? Black Independence Day launch event. This is the last panel, and I'm so, so, so grateful that I got to be a part of it, that I got to hear a few guys' stories, and I can't wait for more.
Thank you.
This was a dream. Thank you, LA and Markeisha and everyone on the team just for making this happen.
Yeah, you guys are really phenomenal. You guys are a phenomenal group. I'm very, very excited. Thank you for everything, seriously, for having me. And thank you, y'all are popping. This was a great Black Girl Magic panel, okay? We had a panel just now, okay?
No, Chloe, Maria, stand by for the Brief Books Podcast email. It's coming. Please, don't ignore it.
Okay, perfect. So I encourage everyone, all of our attendees, panelists as well, to head on over to that link for our wrap, our farewell of the day. Again, amazed, overjoyed to be a part of this. Thank you so much.